Welcome to the Com Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizengauzen. Today is November 24th, and there will be a lot of interesting news. So in this episode, should Russia be brought back into the G8, or should we avoid making the same mistake that Europe once made with Hitler? The mistake of appeasement. Trump posts a strange image, thereby humiliating his European partners. Russia is stirring up wars in Africa and overseeing the flow of migrants into Europe. An important statement from Sweden. Why is the Kremlin in such a hurry to impose a peace plan, and Donald Trump definitely knows the answer why? A flight attendant in Russia gets 7 years in prison for a comment. Putin is terribly afraid of songs, chats and children more than NATO. A major scandal. A famous Russian artist and Putin's confidant openly humiliated an entire country. So what now? The Kremlin is begging China to build a railway in exchange for valuable resources. This and much more will be covered in today's episode. There's a lot of interesting stuff ahead. If you are new to this channel, welcome, and be sure to subscribe so you do not miss future episodes. So Europe has agreed to Russia's return to the G8 after the war ends. Reuters reports this, citing a European plan they have seen. Right now there are a lot of these plans. There are so many of them that it's not entirely clear which points are where, but this is what Reuters is reporting. In general, this 28-point plan was developed, let me remind you, by the UK, France and Germany based on the American one. Previously, one of the European Union's plans was published by The Telegraph, and it had 24 points. You see, there are different plans. So, according to the plan shared by Reuters, Russia will gradually reintegrate into the global economy. It will be invited back into the G8. In addition, Russia's relations will see a gradual easing of sanctions. At the same time, each specific case will be discussed and agreed upon step by step. But what Reuters is describing, let me put it this way, looks about the same as if, after the Anschluss of Austria and the occupation of Czechoslovakia by Hitler, the Allies had said, well, look, it's nothing serious, let's give Hitler a gentle return. Back into the world economy, invite him back to international summits, and gradually lift sanctions. Maybe he'll come to his senses. Oh, wait a second, that's exactly what they did back then. I mean, they actually did bring Hitler back. The very same countries are making the very same mistake. That's the policy of appeasement, and look where it led. They're just repeating one by one the steps that led to World War II. So, from 1933 to 1936, the West turned a blind eye to Germany's rearmament. Britain and France rushed to appease Hitler. The US continued its trade relations. And Germany, right before everyone's eyes, was restoring its military power. What they're doing in Russia right now, they're building this, expanding the plant in Alabuga, doing this and that, and more. Thankfully, Ukraine, credit where it's due, Ukraine regularly takes out parts of the Russian military-industrial complex with drones and missiles. In 1936 to 38, Austria, the Sudetenland, the Rhineland, annexation. In our case, with the modern-day Hitler, it's the annexation of Crimea and the occupation of Donbas. Back then, Hitler violated agreements every time, and every time the West pretended it wasn't worth escalating. Each time, concessions led to new aggression. So right now, all these concessions, in essence, these points in various forms, that's exactly what they are. Well, it's probably something close to the Munich Agreement. In other words, it's a historical analog of the Munich Agreement to today's points 28, 24, 26, and so on. That is, let Hitler take a piece of land for the sake of peace. And then we'll see, maybe he'll calm down. What did that lead to? A direct road to World War II. Well, I think it's obvious to everyone that if all dictators realize that yes, later on the sanctions will even be lifted, and we'll be invited back to the G8, and on top of that they'll return our gold and foreign currency reserves, then of course it's worth going to war. What's the price? To sacrifice 1 million of your own citizens. We don't value them. In dictatorial regimes, they're just bargaining chips. They'll just have more, you see? But now, thanks to our European partners, they've gotten involved. Trump also says this isn't the final version, so we're waiting. But in the end, you know what will happen. That will probably be fundamental. Whether Trump will agree to make fundamental changes to this plan, which, let's be honest, is Russia's plan or not, that's what's most important. And here's an interesting piece of news. A Swedish general has stated that Russia is overseeing the supply of banned substances and migrants to Europe through Africa. So Russia's acts of hybrid warfare against the West are not limited to sending drones, cyber attacks, or sabotage. Moscow has taken control of the routes for illegal migration and the supply of banned substances to the Old World through North Africa. This is what the chief of the General Staff of the Swedish Armed Forces, Lieutenant General Michael Claesson, told the Financial Times. Well, according to him, NATO leadership needs to take control of Russia's actions in the North African region. By the way, it's not just banned substances and migrants there, there's also criminal trafficking and everything else. According to the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, the number of illegal migrants arriving in Europe via the central and western Mediterranean, specifically from Africa, has increased by 1.5 times. In fact, the idea that Russia is deliberately generating waves of migration has long been an open secret. Look at what the Botox chupacabra in the Kremlin has come up with. So, Russia is fueling wars in several countries on the African continent at the same time? Well, in different years. Right now it's Sudan. There was Wagner. Now the African Corps has replaced Wagner. It's the same PMC, the same people, just a different name. And accordingly, not Utkin and Prigozhin, whom Putin blew up on a plane. They supply weapons to Sudan and also to South Sudan, train militants, and all the logistics go through Libya. Libya is actually their key point. I'll talk about it a bit later. They've really expanded their presence there. It's just incredible. In return, Moscow mostly received gold, which is what they needed from Sudan. And as a result, war, mass exodus of the population, migration flows through Sudan, Chad, and into Libya, and then further to Europe. The Central African Republic, same story. Russia has basically established its own protectorate there, arming and training people. Thousands of people are fleeing to Cameroon, then to Chad, then to North Africa, and then to Europe. Mali has also been in the news recently. Unknown parties helped rebels destroy part of the Russian PMC. Basically, after France left Mali, the Wagner PMC moved in, committing mass crimes and clearing out villages. At the same time, Russia supports all sorts of anti-Western governments. In short, it's the same story. The consequences, through the Sahara to Libya, then by boat to Italy. A huge number of migrants. Libya, there it is. This is the key point, the key hub through which Russia channels migration flows. In Libya, Russia supports Marshal Haftar, and the Russian PMC controls part of the oil infrastructure and the logistics along the coast. Through the territory controlled by Haftar, his clan and his relatives, illegal migrants, weapons and so on are sent. All of it goes to Europe, including banned substances. In short, Russia gains a lever of direct pressure on Italy, Malta, Greece, and then on the entire European Union. The mechanics are very simple. Look at how the Russians operate. It wasn't hard for them to corrupt African regimes. They simply provided their own people saying, let us give you a PMC, political strategists. Sometimes they work as a package deal. We overthrow this government and bring our dictatorship to power. Then, under our control, do everything that's required. Wars break out, ethnic cleansing begins, economic collapse follows, and people flee. Russia helps this flow pass through, essentially escorting it across North Africa, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco. Everyone heads to Europe by boat. The main route, the main hub, is Libya. That's the top one. The coastline controlled by Marshal Haftar. And then on to Lampedusa, Sicily, Malta, southern Spain. They set sail one after another. In general, this very chain is mentioned in the report, which says that it has increased by 1.5 times. This is very serious. The number of migrants is increasing. And you know what's most interesting? Here's what. Ukraine is causing major problems for Russians on the African continent, strange as it may sound. There are several reports. There are several interesting reports indicating that highly skilled Ukrainian military specialists have made life a living hell for Russians, both in South Sudan and in Mali. Remember, there was a recent incident in Mali where an entire convoy was shot up. Who did it? We don't know. But honestly, I don't think anyone has ever chased Russians around the globe the way Ukraine is doing now. After the war, I think Europeans will need to seriously consider bringing in real forces to contain Russia, including to contain Russia's influence on the African continent. And of course, the main thing to understand is that you have to deal with Russia using its own methods. Tough and uncompromising. I think Ukraine definitely won't refuse to help. And also, Russia, of course, doesn't always unleash these waves of refugees uncontrollably. It has already been noted in a study I came across that waves of refugees to Europe were triggered before important elections. In the EU, specifically during elections in France and Germany. So these waves of refugees, these surges, happened right before the elections. Well, I don't think I need to tell you who benefited from that. With these actions, they are also undermining support for Ukraine. How so? It's simple. They redirect the European Union's resources from defense to migration. And naturally, what's been happening lately and is noticeable is a split within the European Union over the migration issue. Isn't that so? It is. As for the trafficking of illegal substances, Russian PMCs have long been involved in transporting illegal substances from West Africa, Guinea, Bissau, Sierra Leone, across the Sahara to Libya. And all these illegal goods end up in Italy and Spain. There is proven cooperation between Russian proxies and organizations connected to the Sahel drug cartels. The Sahel includes a group of countries. 5 African countries are part of it. And just so you understand, General Haftar is simply a puppet of Moscow, Moscow's appointee. Just so you know, the Russian Goznak, the Russian mint prints currency for Haftar, as they call them, parallel Libyan dinars. In other words, their official Russian mint prints Libyan dinars. For Haftar in the millions, they print currency for him. So that's how it is. This could be fought if there were the will. And what Europe is doing now is still fighting the consequences, not the root cause. The root cause is the body, and he's sitting there in the Kremlin. By the way, friends, let me remind you, we currently have several important fundraisers going on for the defenders of Ukraine, and today we are raising funds for Night Mavic drones and also Avengers for the 32nd Separate Steel Mechanized Brigade. They are now on the Pokrovsky front, the hottest direction, and we have an appeal from the battery commander of the 32nd Separate Steel Mechanized Brigade. Well, the commander, you'll see for yourself, the commander there, wow, is pure steel. Watch this video.
Бажаємо здоров'я! Я командир батареї американських систем М109 Паладин 32-ї окремої механізованої сталевої бригади, яка зараз знаходиться на Покровському напрямку. Ми разом із глядачами каналу Бориса Тізенгаузена збираємо на комплекси Mavic 3T та Mavic 3 Pro та антени з репітерами до них. Ми дуже дякуємо глядачам каналу, які допомагають нам та не забувають, що війна триває. Дякуємо вам. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
This is the kind of commander the 32nd Separate Mechanized Steel Brigade has, a true warrior, a Valkyrie. So let's support our soldiers, and the drones we're raising funds for will help them strike their targets accurately and destroy all the evil that has come to our land. The link to donate is in the description of this video. There's Mono, there's Private, and there's PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. And to each of you, I always say a huge, huge thank you. You are the real strength. Everyone who helps our defenders. If you don't see the payment details, there's always a QR code, which you can also use to donate. By the way, friends, recently our soldiers from the 54th Brigade wrote to me and said there's something waiting for you at the post office. I went and picked it up. And this is what they sent us. A token of gratitude from the 54th Brigade. And once again, I want to emphasize this is our shared gratitude for your contribution to Ukraine's defense capability. Thank you all so much. Well, as often happens with us, from bright people we have to move on to the dark side. In Russia, a flight attendant from Ural Airlines was sent to a penal colony for 7 years. Do you know what the sentence was for? For spreading false information about the Russian army. And also supposedly out of political hatred. So 7 years for murder in Russia, some people don't even get that much. By the way, even if they do you know how it works? You can commit murder in Russia, then sign a contract. Go to fight in the war in Ukraine and everything will be forgiven. There are dozens of cases, these are just the known ones, where repeat offenders in Russia returned, committed crimes again, including murders, and not just against one person. Again, they would say, sorry, let me go fight again. In other words, for a maniac in Russia right now, the gates of opportunity are wide open. You can kill. There in Russia, you can kill at the front, come back, sign another contract, and everything will be wiped clean for you. And when you return, you'll even be considered a hero and go to schools to talk to kids. It's just insane. These repeat offenders, who've been in prison multiple times, go to schools and tell kids how to live their lives, because in Russia, they're considered heroes. And why did I remember these repeat offenders? Because this flight attendant, whose name is Varvara Volkova, a young woman, ended up in prison precisely because of one of these repeat offenders. In other words, she was repressed for her comments. In one of the village group chats, she wrote that her friends had died in Ukraine at the hands of Russian soldiers. And it was one of the occupiers who had returned from the front who reported her for this comment. And so Varvara Volkova was sentenced to 7 years. I just think, well, I don't even know how to comment on this. The trembling Botox scum sitting in the Kremlin is afraid of everything. I've already mentioned before that they imprisoned a father who was raising his child alone. He was against the war. He said something against the war. They took his child away from him. The child was sent to an orphanage and the father was put in prison. So you can't say that the war is wrong. You can't let those kids who were singing banned songs on the streets of St. Petersburg, remember, let the swans dance. Basically, it's about Swan Lake. So, Putin, when are you finally going to croak there in the Kremlin? So they're imprisoning children, young women, single fathers, everyone, because the regime is terribly afraid. This trembling Botoxed scumbag, as I've already said. He reminds me of the main bug from the movie Starship Troopers, that cult film based on Heinlein's novel. Remember the one they dragged out of the cave, that main arachnid bug? And it looked like a giant larva with lots of eyes. And one of the characters came up to it, touched it with his hand, and it started trembling, that giant larva, as if it was stuffed with Botox. And that character said, "It's afraid." That's what's happening in the Kremlin. They're afraid of children, afraid of teenagers singing songs in the streets. You see? By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Here we expose lies and fight against Russian propaganda, showing the true face of Russia's so-called greatness, so that no one has any illusions. And we're also conducting a census here of people who have honor, conscience, and a demand for justice. So subscribe, let's see how many of us there are. Donald Trump not, I don't know, almost started to stutter. He never ceases to amaze, let me put it gently. He posted, or rather reposted on his social media, a picture created by artificial intelligence where he is depicted as an emperor in armor. At his feet are kneeling people in suits. They look like chancellors. Friedrich Merz from Germany, Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Mr. Starmer. It's just astonishing, really. Well, why not make a picture where at Trump's feet, Putin, Maduro, and Lukashenko are lying in tears and drool, kneeling. And then add a caption saying, "No one will escape his justice." That actually fits them better. You could add Kim Jong-un or the Iranian Ayatollah there too. Or what is this really? I just don't understand why you would humiliate your own supporters, those who are on your side. That's another question, by the way. Or maybe it's like that saying, "Beat your own so that strangers will be afraid." I get it, it's a narcissistic type, but still. These are such typical childish pranks, but these are NATO partners. Guys from your own club, your golf club, to put it in terms Donald Trump would definitely understand. Humiliating and dominating is a pretty questionable policy toward partners you might need to fight alongside against the club of dictators. That's all. I remember when I first heard the phrase, "world leaders are lining up to kiss my ass," that was Donald Trump who said it. At the time, I just thought, no, that must have been translated wrong. No, it was translated correctly. Well, let's get back to the topic. So to understand this, Putin used a little trick. Lately, he's been saying that Russia is a multinational country, that everyone there is basically one big family. Why is he doing this? Well, so that the whole family would go to war, so to speak. Everyone go fight for Moscow. Everyone outside the MCAD, you go fight. So here's another representative of Putin. The official representative and one of Russia's most famous actors, Sergei Bezrukov, got caught up in a blatantly imperial, downright chauvinistic scandal. A classic case for Russians. At a press conference, he told a funny story, at least he thought it was funny, about his visit to Uzbekistan. He was there on tour in Uzbekistan. And here's what the story is about. So this Bezrukov suddenly wanted, since he plays Yesenin in one of his plays, to visit the cemetery where Yesenin's daughter Tatiana is buried and lay flowers there. That's over there in Tashkent, I think. So this Bezrukov says, at night, I want to go to the cemetery. And the way he told it, he said, I gathered all the flowers that were given to me at the concert in Uzbekistan and decided to take them to the grave. He arrived at the cemetery at night, and then some guard comes running out. And this is where it gets really interesting. This Bezrukov guy starts clowning around and imitating the guard, who didn't know Russian and spoke with an accent. He mocked him like that, but I'm not going to do it here. He says he didn't know Russian, spoke so funny, and in general it was all just so hilarious. So basically, he was doing the same thing they did on Russian television. There was a show where they made fun of citizens from Tajikistan. That show was called Nasha Russia. And Bezrukov found it so funny that the guard couldn't speak Russian. And so when that part of the press conference came out, it just infuriated the conscious part of Uzbekistan. Because they said, why is he supposed to speak Russian? Does everyone here have to speak it? Are we supposed to bow down before Bezrukov? Who are you anyway, coming here like this? The man sincerely wanted to try to understand you, and you're mocking his accent. So, in general, why did I choose this news for today's episode? Because no matter how much the great power chauvinists say that we are all one people, all brothers, one big multinational family, no, for them, Russians have always been the titular nation. As soon as they no longer need to talk about the multinational family, all these Bezrukovs will return to the screens, though, by the way, they never really left. All the movies like Brigada, Brother 2, and the rest will come back where people from the North Caucasus are portrayed entirely as mafia, and everyone else is considered second-rate. Ukrainians are also seen as second-rate. Only they, the Russians, are considered great, but I would actually like to hear Bezrukov speak Uzbek. With what kind of accent? We would have discussed it. I've never liked this Bezrukov anyway. He's a phony hack. All those who joined the official pro-Putin support group, those famous Russian actors, singers, they are complete scum. You have to understand, they turn a blind eye to the fact that Putin is a maniac on a planetary scale. By the way, I read up on this Bezrukov, and I had good reason to call him scum. A fact from his biography, he lived with his wife for 15 years. When tragedy struck, his wife's son from her first marriage, whom he'd lived with for 15 years, died. He'd lived with this stepson for about 12 years too. So the son died. He left his wife in that difficult state, and he left, and it turns out he already had 2 illegitimate children. I'm not the morality police here, by any means. It's just another detail in Bezrukov's portrait. Valentin Gaft was right after all. It's not scary to die. What's scary is that after your death, you'll be played by Bezrukov. And here's some news that continues the story about Russia's control over part of the African states and how this can be countered. Libya itself, or rather, well, it's unclear, not Haftar, who is Moscow's puppet, but the officially recognized Libyan government, has arrived in Washington and is offering Libyan oil in exchange for Russian oil, to replace Russian oil. A wonderful proposal. The government has arrived. The first tender has already been announced, and there is interest from American companies. Well, overall, I think this would be a good option. By the way, here's another important question. Is the US even interested in such a replacement? Interesting. And the US and Western countries are trying to prevent Russia from selling its oil and energy resources. This will lead to a market shortage, and Libya could become an alternative. This is already an official statement. Overall, it seems to me that cooperation with the internationally recognized government of Libya should now be a priority for Europe, not even the US. Europe is currently struggling with the consequences of the migrant crisis, and there's no end in sight. And traditionally, since we're already talking about migrants in Europe, let's send our regards to Angela Merkel. And here's some news about Russia rising from its knees, but something is going wrong. Russia will ask China to build a railway in Siberia in exchange for rare earth metals. So here's what the governments have come up with. Chinese companies are being offered to build the Kuragino-Kizil railway, which is in Tuva, in exchange for the right for Chinese investors to develop deposits of rare and rare earth metals in the region. This was reported by the head of the Republic. Well, for some reason, I picked this one out. I'm telling you, this news today is going to be absolutely key. According to him, similar deals exchanging infrastructure for resources are already being used by China in Mongolia. Now that's what I call real news. China has indeed, as part of its Belt and Road Initiative, managed to make countries quite dependent, giving them loans and building large infrastructure projects. But for a great empire to ask for a railway to be built in exchange for access to its own resources, now that's Putin truly lifting Russia off its knees. So Putin supporters, don't worry, no one is coming to take your resources as you always claim. You're giving them away yourselves. Well, more precisely not you, but the 5-foot-tall conqueror you worship like a deity. Before you know it, there will be no resources, no Russia, and the bald jellyfish will already be in China with his cronies. And you'll have to learn Chinese. Putin's got his children or grandchildren already know Chinese, but you'll have to learn it yourself. Friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, subscribe to this channel, and let's help our defenders, our artillerymen. The link to donate is in the description of this video. Wishing us all a peaceful day and glory to Ukraine.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.